Hello my gorgeous friends of Webflow, it's your friendly neighborhood Francesco from Supasido here. What if you could add an interactive water ripples effect to any section of your Webflow project? With zero code, full customization, real-time tweaking and even accessibility controls? Well, that's exactly what we're doing today. In this tutorial, I'll walk you through a fully configurable ripples effect that you can apply to any section or element in Webflow, from standalone hero banners to full CMS galleries. It's built on top a lightweight jQuery plugin, enhanced with a touch of GUI magic and wrapped in a clean, attribute-based configuration system, so that even if you're not a JavaScript person, you can still use and tweak the effect with confidence. We'll look at how to apply the effect using a single attribute, how to fine-tune it visually using an embedded config panel, how to disable it on mobile or toggle it via a button, and of course, how to control it globally across multiple elements, thanks to a smart grouping mechanism. And as always, everything is fully clonable, no-code friendly and built directly inside Webflow. No external setup, no nonsense. If you're looking forward to it as much as I am, stick around, and if you find my videos helpful and want to support my work, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. But now, if you're ready, let's dive in. Alright, let's start by taking a quick look at the structure of this page. At the top here, we have a navigation bar with a glass effect, which has absolutely nothing to do with the ripples effect we'll be working on today. But since it looked nice, I decided to add it in. If you're curious about how this effect was created, or if you missed the video where I explain how to build a glass effect navbar like this one, you'll find the link to the tutorial down below in the video description. But leaving that aside, let's focus on what matters here. Just below the navbar, we have our first section. As usual, it has the base class section, and I also added a combo class, cc-hero, that simply forces the section to take up the full height of the viewport, using a height of 100 dvh. Now, quick note here. What's the difference between dvh and the traditional vh? VH units are based on the viewport height, but on mobile, when the browser's address bar shows or hides, that height can change unexpectedly. DVH, dynamic viewport height, solves this problem, giving us the actual visible height at any moment, even when browser UI changes. It's a great option to use when you want full height sections on mobile and you want things to stay consistent. Now, back to our section. I've assigned a background image here, with background size cover. That way the image fills the entire section, no matter its aspect ratio, and scales nicely with the viewport. We're not using any tiling and the background is not fixed. And this is important. For the ripples effect to work, the element that receives the effect must have a background image. The plugin doesn't apply ripples to an img tag or any image inside the element. It needs to act on the background image itself, using WebGL distortion. So, if you want to add ripples, you must assign the background image to the element that gets the effect, not just drop in an image. That's key. Now, as usual, the really important things happen in the element settings panel. Here, you can see we've applied the attribute fc-ripples equals component. This tells the solution, this is a ripples component. Initialize the effect on this element. Without this attribute, nothing happens. We've also added fc-ripples-config equals hero. This one is optional, and we'll understand its role better when we view the live link in action. For now, this attribute activates a live GUI panel that lets us adjust parameters on the fly and sets its name. So it's mainly for convenience, but very handy. Finally, I've also included fc-ripples-disable-mobile. Again, this is optional, but a good idea. This disables the effect on mobile devices, where WebGL-based effects can easily impact performance or battery life. If you want to keep things lightweight on mobile, you should definitely use it. As for the rest of this section, all the other elements here are decorative. They don't affect the ripples effect. We have a main container with a combo class cc-hero to control vertical padding and sizing. Inside that, there's a section content wrapper and just a simple heading. But the other key piece here, apart from the section, is this little button. It's a custom element we've given the class ripples play post button. Technically, this is a button element. We created it as a custom element, then used the tag field to set it as a real button. In the style panel, we zeroed out its padding, gave it a width and height, and positioned it absolutely in the bottom right of the section. The main container is set to position relative to allow that positioning. Then we adjusted the bottom and right offsets to move it away from the corner a little bit. And finally, gave it a background color. Inside the button, there's a simple LUT animation, a play pause icon. The animation toggles each time the button is clicked. Now, as usual, the key part is in the element settings panel. We've added this attribute, fc-ripples equals toggle. This marks the button as a toggle for the ripples effect. It's optional but very useful. With this button, users can enable or disable the effect live, which is great for demos or for giving users control if the effect is heavy on their device. For accessibility, we've also added area-label equals toggle ripples effect. That tells screen readers what this button does. And area-pressed equals true. That helps communicate the current state. If the effect is active, area pressed is true. If it's disabled, the attribute updates to false. This helps users who rely on screen readers or keyboard navigation. Finally, why use a play pause animation? Because it clearly communicates what's happening. When you click, you see the button switch between play and pause states, which fits perfectly with the idea of enabling or disabling an effect. That's why I chose a LUT animation for this button. It makes the interaction clearer and more engaging. And that's everything for this first example. Now we'll look at the live version and then move on to our second example. Now that we're looking at the live version of the project, there are a couple of things worth pointing out. First of all, by hovering our cursor over the section, we already get this really nice ripples effect. It reacts instantly and adds a subtle, almost tactile interaction to the hero area. And what's even more interesting here is that this effect is working without us having configured anything manually. We didn't specify any custom values, and that's on purpose. To make things easier and faster to set up, the solution uses default values for all the core parameters. So, all you really need to do is mark the element using the attribute fc-ripples equals component, and you're good to go. If the resolution, drop radius, or perturbance attributes are not provided, and we'll see what they are in a moment, the script will automatically fall back to reasonable defaults. This makes the setup much faster and it allows you to prototype and experiment without needing to manually fine-tune settings from the start. Now, the second thing we notice is this little floating panel in the top right corner. Actually, there are two of them. But the second one we'll see later, when we get to the next example. For now, let's focus on the one labeled hero. And as you probably guessed, that name comes from the attribute fc-ripples-config equals hero. This is the attribute we assign to the hero section, and its value controls the label of the GUI panel. The panel itself is generated automatically by the script, and it allows you to tweak the parameters of the effect live, directly from the front end. That means you don't have to constantly jump back into Webflow, adjust the settings, publish, reload, and repeat. You can see exactly what each value does, live in the browser. Then, once you find a sweet spot, you go back to Webflow and apply those values as attributes. Let's quickly break down what each of these parameters controls and why the min and max values were chosen the way they were. First one, resolution. This sets the resolution of the WebGL texture used to simulate the water surface. Higher values mean a smoother and more detailed effect, but also more GPU usage. Min value is 64. Anything below that becomes chunky and pixelated. Max value is 2048. Going above this isn't really worth it and can cause performance issues, especially on laptops or mobile devices. The default value is 512, a good balance between quality and performance. So unless you really need ultra fine ripples, 512 or 1024 is usually the sweet spot. Then we have the drop radius. This defines the radius of each ripple when it's triggered, in pixels. Think of it like the size of the stone you're throwing into the water. Min value is 1. Tiny, barely noticeable ripples. Max value is 50. Big, soft, dramatic waves. Default value is 15. Subtle, responsive, and pleasant to interact with. If you want a more splashy effect, try values around 25 and 30. For something elegant and low profile, keep it closer to 10 or 15. Finally, we have perturbance. This controls the strength of the distortion applied to the background. It's the intensity of the wave effect, from flat water to stormy sea. Min value is 0. Effect is invisible. Max value is 0.1. Starts getting pretty wild and wobbly. Default value is 0.004. Barely there, subtle, but adds a nice shimmer. A good range to play with is 0.003 to 0.05, depending on how dramatic you want the look to be. And again, all these values are tweakable via the live GUI, and the changes apply instantly. This makes it super easy to fine-tune the look and feel of the effect based on your design, image, or layout. Now, before we move on to the second example, let's briefly go back into our Webflow project. Let's say we've played around with the GUI and found a configuration we really like. What should we do now? Well, it's time to clean up the test panel and make our setup permanent. To do that, we simply remove the fc-ripples-config attribute from the section that will hide the GUI panel. Then take note of the values that worked best: resolution, drop radius, perturbance, and finally add those values as attributes directly in Webflow using the attributes data-resolution, data-drop-radius, and data-perturbance. This way, the effect will initialize with your preferred settings without relying on the GUI at all. Clean, optimized, and production ready. Alright, let's move on to the second example. Let's now take a look at our second example, and this time things get a little more interesting. If we open the Webflow project, we'll notice right away that no attributes have been applied directly to the main section or to its immediate containers. So, the fc-ripples equals component attribute is not there, at least not yet. But if we dive a little deeper into the layout, here's what we find. Inside the section's content wrapper, we've added a collection list, styled with the class gallery list wrapper. This list is bound to a very simple CMS collection called gallery, which includes just 6 items. Apart from the default name and slug, each item has only one custom field, an image. That's it. If we expand the list inside the navigator, we'll find the collection list element itself, styled with the class gallery list. This class is responsible for applying a 3-column layout, which gives us this nice masonry-like arrangement of images. This layout is actually based on a super simple technique I've shown in a previous tutorial. I leave the link in the description if you want to check it out. For now, what's important to know is that the column gap is set to 1 rem, just to give the images a bit of breathing room. Now, here's where things get interesting. If we select the collection list element and check the element settings panel, we'll notice that it has two attributes: fc-ripples equals group and fc-ripples-config equals gallery. At first glance, that might seem a bit confusing because we're not actually applying the effect to the list itself, right? In the first example, these attributes were attached to the element that received the effect. So, what's going on here? Well, we'll explain it properly in just a second. For now, let's park that thought and explore the structure a bit more. Inside the collection list, each item is styled with the class gallery list item. We use this class to add a 1 rem bottom margin between rows, set the position to relative so we can stack element inside, add a white border for subtle photo frame effect, and apply an outer shadow to give the design a bit more depth. None of these styles have anything to do with the ripple effect directly. They are just visual. Now, inside each gallery list item, we find the actual image, styled with the class gallery list item image. This image takes 100% of the width to ensure it gets properly displayed on every browser. But, and this is crucial, we don't apply the ripples effect to this image directly. Why? Because we've already said that the ripples plugin requires the effect to be applied to an element with a background image, not a native IMG element. So, we cannot just attach the effect to this image and call it a day. So, what do we do? Well, here's the trick. We add a div block right on top of the image and give it the class gallery list item overlay. Then, we set this overlay to position absolute. We use the full preset, so all 4 offsets, top, right, bottom, left are 0. And this makes the overlay perfectly cover the entire list item. Then, inside the element settings panel, we bind the overlay's background image to the CMS image field. So, even though it's just a background, the overlay visually displays the same image as the IMG below. And this time, we can finally apply the effect. So, we also apply the attribute fc-ripples equals component to the overlay. This tells the script, hey, this is the element you should apply the ripples effect to. But we're not done yet. There's a small detail to take care of. By default, the background image may not scale the way we want. So we also add a background image manually inside the style panel, and we set background size to 100%. This ensures that the actual image pulled from the CMS fills the full width of the overlay, just like the native IMG does. So visually, they look identical, and the overlay will be the one receiving the interactive ripple effect. Now you might be wondering, why go through all this trouble instead of just dealing with the overlay itself? Good question, and here's why. Background images don't occupy space in the layout. They don't influence the height or width of an element. They're just visual. If we only used an overlay with a background image, the list item would collapse and the layout would break. So we use a real image to define the size and aspect ratio, and then we layer an overlay on top that shows the same image as a background. This gives us the best of both worlds, visual consistency and full effect support. Lastly, you'll notice that each item includes a toggle button, just like in the first example. It lets us enable or disable the ripples effect on a per item basis. So now let's go back to those two attributes we saw earlier on the collection list. fc-ripples equals group and fc-ripples-config equals gallery. Why are they applied to the list instead of the individual overlay components? Well, the answer is simple. CMS bindings. You cannot dynamically generate a GUI panel for each CMS item because the Webflow designer doesn't allow you to assign custom values or configurations per item in a collection list, at least not in a straightforward way. So, instead, we define a group configuration and we control all items within that group from a single shared panel. This makes the whole system scalable, accessible, and extremely easy to manage, even with dozens of items. Alright, now let's take a look at the live version and see how this setup behaves in action. Let's now open the live preview and see how the effect performs on the actual page. Just like in the first example, the ripples effect works perfectly here as well. Every time we move the cursor over one of the items in the collection list, we can see the ripples animation reacting smoothly. Now, if we use the control panel to modify the parameters for the gallery group, for instance if we tweak the drop radius and perturbance values, we can clearly see the changes being reflected across all items in the list. Why gallery? That's the exact value we assign to the fc-ripples-config attribute on the collection list. Let's say it once again, that attribute not only activates the test panel but also determines its label, making it easy to identify which group you're editing. This shared configuration panel, as we've already mentioned, lets us test different settings without jumping back and forth between Webflow and the live site. We can preview everything in real time, adjust parameters like drop radius, resolution, and perturbance, and instantly see the results. Now, while we're at it, there are two more things we can test directly from this live page. First, and this works especially well in the hero section, we can trigger the ripples effect by clicking anywhere on the component, not just by hovering with the cursor. This gives us another way to interact with the effect, which can be useful depending on your design goals. Second, we can test the behavior of the small toggle button in the bottom right corner. These buttons, we already know that, allows us to disable or re-enable the effect at runtime. Let's try it. Hovering or clicking on the section currently triggers the ripples, as expected. But if we click the toggle button, all ripple activity stops. Moving the cursor or clicking again on the section has no effect. If we click the toggle once more, the animation resumes, and we're back in business. By the way, the button icon also changes to reflect the current state, switching between a play and pause symbol to indicate whether the effect is active or disabled. Why is this useful? Because in a real-world scenario, giving users the option to pause or disable animations, especially visual or motion-heavy ones, can improve both performance and accessibility. Now, one last note. In the hero section, we also added the attribute fc-ripples-disable-mobile. We said that this tells the plugin to completely disable the effect on mobile devices. If we inspect the live page and switch to a mobile viewport and refresh, we'll notice that no ripples are triggered, not even when clicking or tapping. In this case, since the effect is permanently disabled on mobile, it also makes sense to hide the toggle button altogether. There's no point in showing it if there's nothing to toggle. And with that, we wrap up the second example. In the next section, we'll take a quick tour behind the scenes and break down the logic and code that powers this ripples effect, so we can understand how it all comes together and how you can make it your own. All the logic is contained in a single script block, and you'll find it inside the page settings under the before body tag section. And yes, the code is fully commented to help you understand what each part does in case you want to customize or exploit it further. Now, I won't go line by line, don't worry, but here's a quick overview of how it all works. First of all, we load two external libraries. jquery.ripples, which is the core plugin responsible for generating the ripples effect, and LilGUI, the lightweight UI library we use to generate those little control panels you saw earlier. After that, our script kicks in by identifying all elements that have the attribute fc-ripples equals component. These are the DOM elements we want to apply the effect to. Then, we check whether the effect should be disabled on mobile, and if that's the case, we skip the element entirely. Once the component passes all the checks, the script reads its initial configuration: resolution, drop radius, and perturbance, either from custom data attributes or from default values. Then comes the fun part. The ripples effect is initialized, and if a toggle button is present inside the component, we add the ability to pause or resume the effect on click. We also listen to window resizes and automatically update the ripple canvas size accordingly. Now, here's the smart bit. If a component is part of a group, meaning it's nested inside a parent with fc-ripples equals group, then we collect all components in that group and assign them a shared configuration. This is what allows us to use a single GUI panel to control all of them at once. If the component is not part of a group and instead has its own fc-ripples-config attribute, then we create a standalone GUI panel just for that component. Either way, the LilGUI panel is initialized, styled, and positioned vertically on the page. Each time you change a value from the GUI, we reinitialize the effect with the updated configuration. But, thanks to a debounce function, we avoid triggering too many updates too quickly, which helps performance and prevents unnecessary WebGL warnings. At the very bottom of the script, you'll find three helper functions. init-ripples sets up the effect with the right parameters. isMobile is a simple utility to detect if the user is on a small screen. And debounce helps us limit how often we re-trigger the ripples engine when settings change. And that's pretty much it. Before we wrap up, just a quick reminder. At the very bottom of the page, you'll also find a summary table of all available attributes, including which ones are required, which ones are optional, what they do, their default values, and even the suggested value ranges. You'll also find a note on where each attribute should be applied. That should give you everything you need to both understand and customize the ripples effect in your own projects. We looked at how to apply a ripple effect to any element in Webflow using simple custom attributes, how to use background overlays to maintain full control over layout and styling, how to manage groups of ripple elements with shared configuration, and how to tweak everything from resolution to drop radius in real time with a visual panel that you can easily remove before publishing. Everything you saw today is part of a fully clonable Webflow project, ready to be explored, reused, or remixed into your own builds. You'll also find a complete list of available attributes at the bottom of the page, including required parameters, optional ones, default values, and suggested ranges. It's all there to help you customize the effect with precision and ease. And if you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more Webflow tips and tricks. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Matane!